I am so conservative.
Rationalize in my head. These are things I read in the
I'm going to talk
scripture.
about Willow Creek.
Okay.
Willow Creek, a few years back, had
I
invited.
remembered at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah. I am so conservative. If you didn't jump to conclusions, you might not get any exercise. I am so conservative. I am so conservative.
Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. We are nearing the end of the days of social distancing. And when they're over, we'll emerge from safe spaces from our homes. Will anyone recognize us from our friends or extended family? Will social cues need to be relearned? Will anyone notice or care that I really am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving? In the meantime, on social media, those who may be new to this webcast probably still need to know that this is a trigger warning. This is not a safe space. If you are easily offended by having your ideas challenged or maybe even by our satire. Today is April 14, 2020, and this is broadcast number 185. Joining us this week is our friend Dr. Robert Bowman to talk about his new book, Jesus, Resurrection, and Joseph's Visions. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher, co-host, and resident COVID-19 tracker is Ron Menzel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw that everybody was wearing face masks, and decided to go back inside. Our sponsors for this webcast include the Designer Jesus collection. No longer do you need to be embarrassed by your church's Jesus. Check out the many new fashions in Jesus's, I don't know how to say that, at the Designer Jesus collection, coming to a runway near you. And World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. And if you hold on a second, I'm going to take care of something. Okay. If you enjoy our program, or if it really annoys you and you'd like to inflict it on other people because you're a masochist, to ensure your continued access to this program, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget, I meant to say sadist, not masochist. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. People all over the country are wondering, what did he mean by masochist? No, I meant sadist. Okay, welcome, Rob Bowman.
And we're talking about his book today, Joseph's Resurrection and Jesus Resurrection and Joseph's Visions, not the other way around.
I didn't know Joseph was resurrected.
Yeah. Jesus' Resurrection and Joseph's Visions. Let's get that right here.
Yeah.
And theoretically, it's out, right? In theory, at least.
Yes, the book is in print. It is available, but if you order it from Amazon currently, you're looking at probably a delay because Amazon is having to prioritize what it's able to ship to people. So right now, probably the best way to get the book is to order it directly from our ministry at faiththinkers.org. And that's probably the easiest way to get it right now.
You know, I've used Google Maps to try to find a town name theory because I hear everything works well there. But
that's right.
I haven't found it. I moved there in a heartbeat. So faiththinkers.org, right?
Yes, thinkers.org.
Okay, that's the quickest way to get the book, which we are talking about
Just don't
today.
say it 5 times fast because it'll sound kind of odd.
Okay, the book is Joseph's Jesus is Don. You're gonna have me saying this all day.
Here we go.
The book title starts with the word Jesus, Jesus' resurrection or Jesus' resurrection, and Joseph's vision. Right? Okay.
Right.
So, which Joseph in the Bible, he had a vision. It was actually a dream, but we're not talking about that one, are we?
No, we're talking about the 19th century founder of Mormonism, Joseph Smith Jr.,
Okay.
who claimed that he saw the Father and the Son in the spring of 1820, that he had regular communications with an angel named Moroni throughout the 1820s,
Okay.
and that he was also visited by a number of other celestial beings, including John the Baptist, Peter, James, and John, and then after he founded the LDS Church, supposedly other beings appeared to him. So he was the visionary par excellence, if you take his stories as fact.
Now, he was not wearing an amazing Technicolor dream coat when he.
Oh, that's a different Joseph.
Okay, that's a different Joseph. This is he wasn't thrown into a pit and sold into slavery and all that. We're talking about a guy who, lived in upstate New York. He claims that an angel came to him and eventually showed him where these gold plates were buried, and these gold plates were allegedly written in reformed Egyptian hieroglyphics, which no one has ever found an example of. So we don't know what these reformed Egyptian hieroglyphics looked like. Here was a guy.
Unless you believe the Anthon transcript is an actual copy of characters from the plates.
The Anthon.
The Anthon transcript.
Is it Anthon? Was he a person or what?
Yeah. The story is that Joseph Smith gave his associate and financial backer, Martin Harris, a piece of paper on which he had written a number of characters copied from the plates that Martin Harris then took to New York City to have authenticated by a couple of scholars, one of whom was Charles Anthon. And the piece of paper is commonly known now as the Anthon transcript because it was this piece of paper that supposedly had a transcription of several of the characters from the plates that Joseph gave to Martin to take to show Charles Anthon. Well, Joseph Smith's version of what happened in this incident differs markedly from what Charles Anthon's version of the story is. Martin Harris supposedly told Joseph Smith that Anthon authenticated the characters and a translation. That's the alleged piece of paper.
Yeah, it's
or
been
a copy of it. I don't think anybody thinks that's the actual piece of paper, but it's supposedly a copy of the paper that Joseph gave Martin Harris. Well,
you see
Martin Harris supposedly told Joseph that Charles Anthon said they were true ancient characters and that the translation Joseph had given was the best translation he'd ever seen of the Egyptian.
Really?
Charles Anthon said that he told Martin Harris it was bunk, that he was being swindled, that the text was not recognizable as any particular language. But the Mormons believe Joseph Smith and Martin Harris's version of the story.
As you can see in the third character from the left, you have an ancient computer mouse. They had two button mouses back then. It's clearly the Egyptians were very advanced for their time. And this looks like an ancient birthday cake right here. So in any case, I have a hard time really. I mean, I've seen my share of Egyptian hieroglyphics. My Old Testament prof at grad school, Jim Hoffmeyer, we've had him on the program. He's actually an Egyptologist.
Right.
I kind of would like to run this by him someday and say, does this look like it could be an example of reformed hieroglyphics in any way, shape?
Well, The Mormons today admit that they're not hieroglyphics.
Okay.
What they claim is that they're actually something like a later script that was developed in Egyptian that was more of a, you could call it kind of a cursive version, to use a layman's term. And the Egyptians did develop such a script, but that would have been independent of the, it didn't look like that. And according to Charles Anthon, the paper that was shown to him had markings that looked like a hodgepodge of different kinds of characters. Some of them might have looked like ancient Greek and Latin characters, but they were just crosses and a bunch of nonsense symbols. And apparently, if he said Greek or something like that in the midst of this conversation he had with Martin Harris, Harris went, "Oh, so it could be authentic," and that may have been enough. Anyway, the paper is the only document of any significance that allegedly has copies of the text. And in the book that I've done, I have a brief discussion about the Book of Mormon and the origins of it, and the visions that were involved in bringing that to pass. But the book is mainly focused on the heavenly beings that Joseph Smith claimed that appeared to him over the course of about 9 years, beginning with the Father and the Son in the spring of 1820, then a heavenly being, an angel that is later identified as Moroni, from 1823 through 1829. And then also in 1829, supposedly Joseph and Oliver Cowdery were visited first by John the Baptist and then by Peter, James, and John in order to authorize them to be baptized and to receive the LDS priesthood authority. So those are the foundational visions of Mormonism, and they are the focus of the second half of the book. The first half of the book focuses on the evidence for Jesus' resurrection and his appearances in the first century to the women followers, to the apostles, and later to the apostle Paul, who became an apostle as a result of that encounter. So the book is an attempt to compare the evidence pertaining to Jesus' resurrection with the evidence pertaining to Joseph Smith's visions. So we use the same method, the same critical historical inquiry methods to examine the evidence for Jesus' resurrection and then the evidence for Joseph Smith's visions and see what we come up with. And what we come up with is we have very good reasons to accept Jesus' resurrection as historical fact, and we actually have very strong historical evidences against Joseph Smith's claims.
Okay.
So that's the thesis of the book. And the reason why I wrote this book is because Mormons historically have claimed that Jesus' resurrection appearances, especially to Paul, are analogous to Joseph Smith's visions of Jesus and the Father, as well as the angels and so forth.
So
they have often tried to argue that if you can believe the Apostle Paul, you should be able to believe the prophet Joseph. So this book is really an answer to all those kinds of apologetic arguments that Mormons use to show, no, we're quite reasonable to believe Paul and the other apostles in the New Testament, but not believe Joseph Smith.
So to summarize what you just said for the folks at home or wherever they are, what your book is basically doing is it's asking the question and answering the question: is the evidence for Joseph Smith's visions as good as the evidence for Jesus's resurrection, which is actually very good. It's so good that it has actually persuaded people who didn't believe in the resurrection. Once they examined the evidence, they changed their minds. We have historical examples of this. It's very good evidence. Is it as, and you've come to the conclusion, no, it's in fact, as we look at it, there's way more. We have tons of evidence against the authenticity of the visions.
Right. This is important to emphasize. It's not just a lack of evidence.
Right.
It's
So-
the actual evidence against Joseph's claims that's so devastating.
Can you think of one? I don't know. Can you think of one bone you'd toss to a Mormon apologist and say, "Okay, I'll grant you this one," or is it pretty much a wash? Is it pretty much there's just nothing here?
Well, the strongest argument that Mormons have for any of this is that on one occasion, 3 other men allegedly saw an angel alongside Joseph Smith. And that is in the testimony of the 3 witnesses, which is printed at the beginning of every copy of the Book of Mormon now.
Okay.
Where Joseph had 3 associates and supporters of his meet with him out in the woods. And allegedly, the 3 men, along with Joseph, saw the gold plates shown to them by an angel, who, by the way, is not named and is apparently not Moroni, although that's complicated, but apparently not Moroni. But anyway, an angel shows Joseph and his 3 associates the plates. And so Mormons will appeal to this and say, it's not just Joseph who saw the angel. There's other people that saw an angel. And so that's their strongest argument. So one of the things that I do in the book is I address that particular issue, that particular claim, and look at the historical evidence pertaining to the testimony of the 3 witnesses, as well as the later testimony of 8 witnesses, another group of 8 men who said that they saw the gold plates, although they did not see an angel. So yeah, that if they have anything that even remotely appears to be evidence in favor of the visions of Joseph Smith, it's allegedly corroborative testimony from the 3 witnesses.
It looks like your examination of Joseph's visions begins with your 6th chapter. Is that correct, on page 155?
Yeah, the book is structured so that the issues pertaining to Jesus' resurrection are then paralleled by the issues pertaining to Joseph's visions. So chapters 2 through 5, those 4 chapters deal with the resurrection. Chapters 6 through 9, another 4 chapters deal with Joseph's visions, and then chapter 10 compares the 2 cases. So it's deliberately written in that parallel structure.
Yeah. We could do probably a whole program just on the evidences for Jesus' resurrection, and
Sure, absolutely.
and I don't think we have time to do both. And I would want people to buy the book just to read that. I mean, well, to read that first. It's like Walter Martin said, how do you tell a counterfeit from the real thing? And he said the FBI trained its agents to first become totally familiar with the authentic dollar bills. I was a bank teller. I handled probably millions of dollars in cash over my career as a bank teller, and then as a bank customer service rep in just a few years. I mean, you handle a lot of money. And I'm telling you, within about 3 or 4 months, as soon as I saw a counterfeit, I could tell right away. I was handling authentic money constantly. As soon as I saw a counterfeit, I go, whoa, this is not a real bill. It becomes really obvious. So we want people to read the first 5 chapters of your book to become familiar with the reasons why we have an authentic account in the Gospels of the resurrection,
Right.
as well as in 1 Corinthians. There's really good, solid testimony in Paul's epistle.
Yes, I discuss the evidence from 1 Corinthians 15 that in Paul's recitation of the witnesses to the resurrection appearances, and compare that with the evidence from the Gospels, show that Paul is giving an independent list of the eyewitness accounts.
Yes.
Of the eyewitnesses that's not based on the Gospels, and the Gospels aren't based on Paul. These are independent testimonies to these particular events. And so that's part of it. One of the reasons why I wrote the book, frankly, is not just to show Mormons that Joseph Smith's visions are false, but to help those Mormons who've already come to that conclusion, or at least are leaning in that direction, but are saying, well, but if I don't believe in Joseph's visions, why would I believe in anything? Why would I believe in God or Jesus? Why would I believe that Jesus rose from the dead? I mean, isn't the evidence for the
Yeah.
resurrections, doesn't it have the same kinds of problems that the evidence for Joseph Smith's visions have? And so it more than anything, I want to help those people to know that you can believe in Jesus without Joseph. That
Yeah,
there
it's
is Christian life after Joseph Smith, and that in fact, if you put your faith in Jesus apart from Joseph Smith, you'll have it on a more secure foundation. And that's why there's an emphasis in the book, as you can see in the subtitle, on the foundational issues, examining the foundations of Christianity and Mormonism, and arguing that the foundations of Christianity are secure, even though the foundations of Mormonism are not. See, many Mormons are taught that if Mormonism isn't true, there can't be any true Christianity. So when they discover that Mormonism is false, they very often abandon Christian faith. In fact, we have a lot of people leaving the LDS Church right now who are becoming agnostics or skeptics.
Yeah.
And so I want to reach out to those people and say, you know, you don't have to abandon faith in Christ when you abandon faith in Joseph Smith. In fact, you're better off believing in Jesus without Joseph Smith, because then you don't have all of these claims that don't add up historically as the foundation of your faith.
One of the things that comes up from time to time as I am dealing with Mormons and other groups, obviously, is kind of this idea that a person with a testimony, this would be really true for Mormonism, is always in a better place than a person with evidence. So they tend to, Mormons particularly, tend to rely more on how they feel about the Book of Mormon than evidence that would confirm or deny the Book of Mormon. So how do you address that in this kind of a book? How do you set up the whole idea that we need to go to evidence first and our feelings should transition to follow the evidence rather than the other way around?
Well, at the beginning of the book, I point out that Mormons themselves appeal to evidence and make arguments in an attempt to defend their beliefs. And specifically, they will try to argue that, as I've already said, that they'll try to argue that Joseph Smith's visions may seem to have some difficulties, but so does the testimony of Paul, because there are these apparent minor discrepancies in Acts in the three versions of Paul's conversion story. And so they'll say, see, that's the same kind of problem. Well, now, what have they done? They have used an argument. And so my point is, if you're going to use arguments, you're going to have to see them through. You're going to have to follow the evidence where it leads. You can't pick and choose when you want to stand on reason and when you want to abandon it for your experience that is beyond reason. So the book is not going to help people who don't care about facts and who don't care about the evidence. I make no bones about where I'm going with this and how I'm approaching it.
So we're talking about Rob Bowman's book, Jesus' Resurrection and Joseph's Visions.
Yes.
And Mormonism, we would argue, has a different Jesus than we have in Scripture. The historical Jesus was resurrected. And one of our sponsors actually addresses that as well.
Yeah, they do. And they ask, there's a very important question, since we're talking about experience and testimonies. Well, the question is, do you cringe when the Christians you hang out with try to introduce Jesus to your non-Christian friends? Well, you can say goodbye to the days when your church's Jesus was a source of social embarrassment. Now, even your church can keep pace with the latest fashion-forward trends in spirituality. Introducing the Designer Jesus Collection. These amazing new Jesus styles are hitting church runways and the most exclusive Jesus fashion shows at churches near you. You don't want to miss Yoga Jesus, Hipster Jesus, Buddy Jesus, Socialist Jesus, Mormon Jesus, and of course, Muslim Jesus. At Designer Jesus Collection fashion shows, you will find a Jesus you'll be proud to introduce to your most sophisticated, cutting-edge friends and acquaintances. Please observe the attendance requirements, cost of admission, your eternal soul, required attire semi-formal, all proceeds benefit His Royal Majesty of the Kingdom of Darkness. The Designer Jesus Collection, London, Paris, Rome, New York, Salt Lake City, and coming to a church runway near you. Now, as I introduced that commercial, I made sure to emphasize the whole issue of experience and personal testimony. That was a uniquely 19th century, early 19th century development in culture as a whole, and in the church in particular. It kind of paralleled the Romantic era, which led to the Transcendentalist movement among liberal Christians who were abandoning deism because it was a stiflingly deadening intellectual exercise. It had turned Christianity into that, and people wanted to feel human for a change. And what we saw was the whole culture transitioning into this thing that eventually becomes kind of like serendipity. What does it mean to you? In fact, it really directly, the whole 19th century movement leads into existentialism in the 20th century. All this is to say that, in the Christian church, we found hymns, the kind of hymns that they never sang before, personal testimony type hymns. And you see Joseph Smith going to great lengths to try to secure personal testimonies, I would say, in a very duplicitous, deceitful fashion myself, after having read these accounts that he goes through, all of the manipulations and gyrations he goes through to get people to be willing to give personal testimony. It seemed to be extremely important to him. You wouldn't have seen that 100 years earlier. You wouldn't have seen that maybe 20 years earlier. And I think we have to take a step back and say, wait a minute, how much have we been caught up in this whole personal testimony thing? Prior to that, people went straight to the Word of God. They went straight to the authority of Scripture. Yes, evidence was important, but it wasn't the evidence of my personal experience. It was objective evidence outside of me that was important in establishing truth.
Well, here's what happened. Mormonism really is birthed out of the after effects of what is commonly called the Second Great Awakening.
Yeah.
Which is the one of the great beneficiaries of that whole movement was the Methodist Church, which went from its beginnings in the second half of the 18th century as a very small movement, of course, at first, to the fastest growing denomination in America in the first half of the 19th century. And that's Joseph Smith was caught up in that. He was interested in the Methodists at one point. And the Methodists were very experiential oriented, but we need to understand what their perspective was. As is the case throughout the Second Great Awakening, the emphasis here was on a personal experience as validation of one's personal salvation, not as validating the truth of one's religion. So the argument was not Christianity is true because I've had this experience, but rather the argument was, I know that I'm saved because this has happened to me. I've had this experience, and it validates or confirms that I have a genuine relationship with Jesus Christ. That becomes transformed in Mormonism to a person having a personal testimony of the truth of the Book of Mormon.
Right.
and of the truth of Mormonism and Joseph Smith as the prophet of God. That's not what the awakenings, the first and second great awakenings were about. They weren't making that kind of claim. And so nobody was saying Christianity is true because I have this feeling in my heart. That just wasn't it, but rather the revivalism was really about challenging people who were only nominally Christian to get serious in their relationship with Christ, to show in the way that they lived and in the experiences that they had as believers that they were genuinely converted. Because the problem was almost everybody was supposedly a Christian.
Yeah.
But the world didn't look like almost everybody was a Christian. So revivalism was really an attempt to shake up people who were nominally Christian but not living as Christians, or not really confident in their Christian faith as personal to them, to have it become very personal and very experiential for them. And that gets distorted out of all recognition in Mormonism.
Okay, so I noticed the title of chapter 6 is Joseph's Visions in Context. What do we know about Joseph Smith? So you're trying to, it looks to me, just from looking at the title, that you want us to understand these visions in the context of Joseph's character, his biography, in
the context of his personal biography, and in the context of his cultural environment in which he lived, because once you understand, what was going on in his society, Joseph becomes a lot more understandable. We can understand where he was coming from. We can see that he didn't just, have these things zap into his mind. He didn't have these things divinely revealed that nobody had ever thought before. I mean, Mormons have this common this myth that until Joseph Smith, the idea that all the churches were wrong and that there was the need for a complete restoration was a foreign idea, and Joseph was shocked by this.
Yeah.
Oh, I had no idea that all the churches were wrong. In fact, Joseph even tries to say that in his 1838, 1839 account that's in Joseph Smith history. That's not true. Joseph's father, Joseph Smith Sr., also had a first vision 9 years before Joseph Jr. supposedly had his.
Oh, things run in the family.
Joseph Sr.'s first vision, he supposedly had it revealed to him that all the world was in spiritual darkness and that there was a need for restoration. So this was a common idea in Joseph's day. He grew up with it. It was in his house growing up.
Yeah.
He didn't have to have this revealed to him direct from heaven by the Father and the Son. It was already in his culture. Now, one other thing. We know that Joseph already had this idea because in his earlier draft of the history, which he wrote in 1832 and then put away, and it was never seen again until 1965. In that 1832 account, Joseph says he'd already concluded from reading the New Testament that all the churches were wrong. He was not trying to know which of the denominations was right and which church to join, because he'd already concluded just from reading the Bible that all the churches were wrong and they were all apostate.
If he had really done that, if he'd really drawn that conclusion, why did he ask the angel which church to join?
Well, see, he didn't do that. That's my point.
Like he didn't to me.
The earlier draft, that he was not asking God or whoever showed up. He wasn't asking which church to join. He was asking how he could be sure of his own forgiveness of sins when there wasn't any church on the earth that he could go to get the straight scoop. Years later, he changes the story and makes it into the aftermath of a revival in which the denominations were vying for members, and Joseph wasn't sure who to join, and so he went asking which church to join, and he was shocked to find out that they were all wrong. That's not his original story, let alone what actually happened.
Yeah. So there are, how many Mormons are aware of the fact this was, you said this account surfaced in 1965?
It surfaced in 1965, and as I'm going to be arguing in a blog article that's going to come out maybe tomorrow or something, it's already written. I'm just waiting on something. As I'm going to argue in this forthcoming article, this 1832 account was leaked by the church historian's office when they realized that they couldn't keep a lid on its existence any longer. The reason why they couldn't do it was a young couple living in Salt Lake City named Gerald and Sandra Tanner.
Aha.
The Tanners had asked for a copy of this strange account that they'd heard about from somebody else. And a couple of people had approached the church historian's office trying to get a copy of it. Were not allowed to get it. And the Tanners had a knack for discovering documents and then releasing them to the public. And the church historian's office was concerned that the word of this would get out without their being in control of the matter. So what they did was they leaked a copy of it to a BYU student who was also like an adjunct instructor or something. He was already teaching there, but he wasn't. He was also going to school there and getting his master's degree. So they gave this student access to the account, and he quoted it in the appendix of his master's thesis. And that's how the world found out about this strange account that was
1965. That was 1965.
And yeah, so 1965, 133 years after Joseph had penned it. And by the way, when I say he penned it, I mean that literally. This is the only account of the first vision written in Joseph's own hand.
Really? So it was
the first
leaked.
account, and it's the earliest account, and it's the only one written in his own hand. And it contradicts Joseph's account that he told 6 years later in what we know as Joseph Smith history.
So when you're saying it isn't simply the absence of evidence, it is the existence of evidence that disproves his claims.
Right. And this is an important distinction, and I would really hope that people come away with a clear understanding of the difference here. And this also applies to the Book of Mormon. You often hear Christians say, well, the Book of Mormon's not true because there's no archaeological evidence for it. That's not a good argument, because maybe there's no archaeological evidence yet, but we'll find some if we keep digging. You know, if there's just an absence of evidence, that's not an evidence of absence. That's a kind of an archaeological truism that you often hear people like Kenneth Kitchen say. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because we haven't found the evidence that a particular city mentioned in the Book of Mormon existed doesn't mean it didn't exist. That's a valid response. So if it was just we didn't have evidence, that wouldn't disprove the Book of Mormon. The problem with the Book of Mormon is not a lack of evidence. The problem is the evidence. We have abundant evidence of what kind of culture existed in the Americas, and specifically in Central America, where most Mormon scholars place the Book of Mormon.
Currently,
We know
right.
what kind of culture it was. We know what kind of infrastructure it had. We know what kinds of technologies it had. And it doesn't match the Book of Mormon at all.
Right.
They have cities. That's about the extent of the of the correlation. It doesn't match geographically. It doesn't match culturally. It doesn't match religiously. The Book of Mormon claims that for at least 2 centuries, and actually a little bit longer than that, but for at least 2 centuries, the entire Book of Mormon lands, the entire culture was thoroughly Christianized. There were no Lamanites and no other ites. The Book of Mormon says that they were all just they were all Nephites. They were all Christians. They were all just believers in Jesus. They were all one big happy Christian family, completely Christianized culture. Basically, it was 2 centuries of devout Methodism, and no non-Christian elements in the culture at all. And then it fell apart over another 2 centuries or so, and they had wars and killed each other off, or at least killed off the Nephites. That's the Book of Mormon story. Well, if that were true, then when we examine the evidence of the culture of the people in the Central American region for the first 2 centuries AD, we should find some evidence of something like a Christian culture, but we don't. We find that they were the same polytheistic society that they had been before and that they were after. There's no cultural change of any significance. There's no religious change. They're pagans.
Right.
They're offering, they're engaged in bloodletting sacrificial rites, and they're believing in various animal deities and that kind of thing. It's a pagan culture through and through, in the exact time period that supposedly everybody was Christian.
You'd at least expect, like, if you're trying to parallel.
The Book of Mormon is not merely a lack of evidence. The problem is we've got too much evidence, and the evidence goes against what the Book of Mormon says. It's the same thing with Joseph Smith's visions. Joseph Smith's visions are not credible, not because we don't have evidence corroborating them, but because we have evidence contradicting them.
You'd expect to see, if we're, I always kind of imagined that the Book of Mormon was trying to present kind of a parallel account of an alleged people of God in the New World. Okay, these were the people of God who had left, or a remnant, if you will, of the people of God who emigrated from the old world to the New World. And if God dealt with them the way he dealt with his people in the old world in the Middle East, well, there was always a remnant. There was always a portion that did not apostatize. There was always a portion that remained faithful. Why don't we find anything like that in the New World when the Europeans arrive?
And the answer is because in Mormon view of history, there was a complete apostasy of Christianity in the 4th century in the Old World. And there was also a complete apostasy of Christianity in the New World at the same time.
So then my question is, why do those two apostasies look so different? Why does the apostasy in the West, in Europe, still carry the name Jesus with it, still carry the name Christianity, why does it still have an outward semblance of a church?
Yep.
Why, in other words, the faith, if we assume that they're right, just for the sake of argument, I don't believe they're right, but if we assume that they're right in that Christianity, literally, the true faith, disappeared from the face of the earth, why did it disappear in such a totally different fashion?
Why didn't Cortez find apostate Christians in Mexico instead of the pagans?
Right.
And really, the pagans in Mexico were not much different than the pagans would have been 1,000 years earlier during the Book of Mormon era.
Yeah.
So it's a good point. And the fact of the matter is that Mormon storyline here really doesn't have a leg to stand on historically or archaeologically. The evidence is massively against it, and Mormons just don't seem to be aware of it.
Right. Well, but that's often the case with many groups. Let's say within the church, how many Christians are Christians because they understand the evidence and biblical teaching, compared to those like us? We spend time saying, okay, what does the Word of God say? How do we know it's historically and in context accurate to what originally happened? There are not that many that do that, unfortunately, and too many churches don't teach it. So I've had Christians, for example, say, well, how can a Mormon believe X? Or how can and I'll say, okay, why do you believe the resurrection is true? Well, because my pastor told me, because my father told me, because my aunt told me, but they don't have any actual reason. So they believe it because of their social structure they're in. largely. Mormons do the same
That's
thing.
often true. I don't know that, I wouldn't want to overgeneralize, but yeah, that's often true that people have just inherited whatever belief they have.
Right.
Here's the difference. In our, especially today with the internet and everything, there's massive information available that it's almost hard to miss it, because it's hard to avoid it, because you're going to get it, you're going to hear it.
Right.
And the evidence is just so massively against Mormonism now that people that were quite happy being Mormons and thought they had testimonies, the standard LDS testimony. And when they heard this evidence, they assumed that there had to be answers to it, because of course there would be answers to it, because Mormonism is true. And so, for example, Hans Mattsson, a Swedish Mormon authority, one of the leaders of the LDS Church in Europe, led a contingent of Latter-day Saints in a meeting with general authorities from Utah, seeking answers to questions about things like, did Joseph Smith really receive the Book of Mormon text by looking at a seer stone in a hat that he had used to search for buried treasure? And Mattsson admits that he was very troubled. At first, he just dismissed the criticisms as anti-Mormon propaganda. But then he started researching it because he was trying to get answers to give to his people. And he found out that, I can't find answers to this. And when he asked the people in Utah for answers, they didn't have any. He actually read Richard Bushman's biography of Joseph Smith, Rough Stone Rolling. And the part about the first vision in Bushman's book really troubled Mattsson, because Bushman is pretty clear that it didn't happen the way Mormons have been taught that it happened, at least. And Mattsson said, you mean when I was a missionary for the LDS Church and I was telling people this is how it happened, I was giving them a myth that really didn't happen that way? And so the truth is that people can put up a brave front about having a testimony, and they know it's true and it's in their heart, and whatever experience that they've had that to them in their mind confirms that it's true. But facts are stubborn things.
They are.
Many people reach a breaking point where the facts just become too overwhelming against their belief, and they can't hold on anymore.
And sometimes they don't understand clearly what the church actually teaches on any particular thing. I want to go to another group just momentarily and come back to this after our break. Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, have a very complicated description of what they call resurrection, which is really not a resurrection. Right. In their case, they teach that everything about you is physical, including your personality, memories, etc. They all simply cease to exist. God later creates a new person to replace you that looks like you and gives them a copy of the memories from his copy. So it is not truly a resurrection, but until you take them through the process, they have this illusion that the person going door to door is actually going to be the one that's raised from the dead, and it's not. So it is a resurrection in name only, and we have, oddly enough,
yeah, by pure coincidence, it sounds like you're describing. Now, why is my share screen not working? Okay, I'm pressing it.
Well, I couldn't describe that. I'm not describing that at all.
Okay, let me cancel. Okay, let me come back. Let me do it again, see if it works. This should work now. Okay, all right. Yeah, by utter coincidence, we just happen to have a sponsor whose product is sold by World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time is gone. And they ask the question, have you ever thought to yourself, I wonder what a completely spiritual, non-physical resurrection would look like? Well, now you can have the answer to that question with the End Time Rhino. Yes, the resurrection in name only. The End Time Rhino is perfect for ad hoc theologizing. It fits any millennial position, and it works with cremations very well. Here's how it works. Take a look at this picture of a cemetery before the resurrection. And now let's look at that same cemetery after the resurrection. Can you tell the difference? No, you can't, and neither can we. Just think of all the advantages. Nothing to clean up, cuts down on expenses such as food, clothing, and shelter, and you never have to worry about your casket appearance again. The End Time Rhino, resurrection in name only, available only at World's End Theology Outlet. And it's very true what you say about Christians not knowing what they believe and not knowing why they believe it. And apparently Mormons have the same problem, don't they?
Well, very often they do. They have been told certain things and maybe not told other things. So
And if they really had
it really depends on the Mormon, just like it depends on the evangelical Christian, how much they really understand about their own church's doctrine. Many people that grow up in traditional Christian churches do not know how to articulate basic issues like the doctrine of the Trinity or the resurrection. Even they may not be able to articulate that very well. So yeah, there's often a gap in knowledge. The difference is that if you close that gap for evangelicals, their faith gets stronger.
Right.
If you close that gap for Mormons, they may start having problems, saying,
Right.
"Well, wait a minute, really? Is that what we really believe?" So it can be difficult for them if they start really understanding what it is the LDS Church has been teaching all along. Plus, the closer you look at the historical evidence pertaining to the origins of Christianity, really the better it looks. It's not true with Mormonism.
It goes the opposite direction with Mormonism. I really like the title of your 9th chapter, After Joseph's Early Visions. I like the part where it says testing the prophet, because it reminds me of a verse in 1 Corinthians 14 where there is an indication that, now I don't want to get into continuationism versus cessationism. Let's just talk about Paul's instruction to the church in Corinth, which had prophets in its midst, people with the gift of prophecy. And he basically, he indicates that the prophecies were to be tested, that they were to be cross-examined, these prophets were. Now, I don't know, I don't attend a continuationist church. I don't know how it works there, but I do know what I've seen on TV. I don't see much testing of prophets going on with Kenneth Copeland. I think he prophesied that COVID-19 would be destroyed before we even got into the month of April. I think history itself tested him and found him wanting. But it sounds like you're testing the prophet in chapter 9. What is that? What's going on? Do I understand that title correctly? And if so, what particular tests do you apply to?
Well, really, in that chapter, there were a lot of things I would like to have gotten into that I just didn't have room for. But in that chapter, I look at the later visions of Joseph that wrapped up the period of origins, the visions to Joseph and Oliver Cowdery by John the Baptist and by Peter, James, and John, supposedly to restore the priesthood and its authority. And in that chapter, what we find out is that Joseph falsified his own revelations by inserting into them, in one of them, a lengthy passage spliced right into the middle of a sentence to backdate information or revelation supposedly regarding these appearances, and the restoration of the priesthood. See, the thing is, as best we can tell, the LDS Church did not claim to have a restored priesthood in the first 2 years or more of its history. after the LDS Church had been around a couple years, Joseph added some ideas of now priesthood was an idea, but so I don't want to make it sound like they didn't talk about priesthood at all. But they didn't claim that some heavenly being or beings had restored the priesthood by directly appearing to or laying hands on Joseph Smith before the church was founded. So Joseph came up with the story of these appearances and inserted something about this into one of his early revelations, or that's in Doctrine and Covenants today, that originally didn't have anything to do with it. It had to do with God telling him not to get wine from unbelievers for the communion services. He came up with some 300 or so word passage that he spliced into the middle of a sentence in that short revelation to talk about all the different heavenly beings that supposedly appeared to Joseph to restore things like the priesthood. So, sometimes testing a revelation is just as simple as finding out if it was given when it was supposedly given.
Oh.
So we're talking with Dr. Rob Bowman about his new book, Jesus, Resurrection, and Joseph's Visions. And if they want to get that, it is available for ordering where?
The easiest place to get it, because right now Amazon is a bit slow, is the easiest place to get it is directly from our ministry. It's called Faith Thinkers. And the website is faiththinkers.org. So that's faith, then the word thinkers, THINKERS, faiththinkers.org. If you go to the homepage of the website, you'll find information where you can get a free excerpt of the first 30 or 40 pages of the book, and you can inquire there about ordering a copy directly from us.
Okay. What else? Faith Thinkers. Do you have anything else that people can sign into, get from your ministry?
We have a number of resources that are free on the website. In fact, just today, we added half a dozen pages of primary documentation regarding the first vision. So we have 6 of the early accounts during Joseph Smith's lifetime of his earliest vision that you can read on our website, and you can compare them, and you can see what they actually say. And one of the features in these articles is that I give all of the biblical passages that Joseph is alluding to or quoting in these different accounts, so that you can see what he's doing with the Bible when he's giving these stories about his first vision. So that's available. All you have to do to find those is scroll to the bottom of the homepage and click on Mormonism, and that'll take you directly to our Mormonism page, where you can find all of these 6 pages of primary documentation. And we have articles on various subjects on the website, not just Mormonism. Articles on the historical Jesus, the resurrection, for example, and book reviews. And, it's growing. It's a new website. It just got started late last year, but we've already got, close to 30 articles on the website.
Okay, good.
I lost my connection briefly. I was going to ask the question, is there or will there ever be an ebook version of your book?
I certainly hope there will be an ebook. It'll probably be close to the end of the year, is my off the top of my head guess. Unfortunately, we don't have that in the works quite yet.
Okay.
I have another question. Is your beard related to COVID-19?
Yeah, I remember you having a beard.
I started this before that became a thing in America.
You're just trying to be my twin, I think.
I'm trying to look older than you.
That was always my aspiration.
I'm not succeeding, but I'm trying.
Yes, well, Dr. Ron Rhodes has asked me in past what Moses was really like.
Yeah.
So, talk about age. Rob, I am really glad you were with us again, and we'll have you in the future. Love having you on. You're kind of one of my favorite smart guys. Not smart Alex, but smart guys, as in intellectually informed. And give Ron a run for his money on occasion.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Ron, would you walk us out of here?
Yeah, hopefully I will not lose my connection while I'm doing it. So I can tell you that our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services come from Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and Deopposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Joe Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wire Tapping. And our original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc., in cooperation with Emergency Managed Care Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never, ever, not even once, be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never happened. All right, Rob, Ron, everybody else.
Everybody, literally every
week.
other person.
Every other person in the whole entire world. Bye.
Bye-bye.